the 20, Johnson back, pressure on, throwing over the middle, complete to the 10, touchdown Williams.
Welcome to the Carousel College Football Show podcast. I'm Kevin Trimble, your moderator, and I've got Brett McMurphy from Stadium Network with us. Brett, how are you doing today?
Good afternoon. Hope you had a great Thanksgiving, Kevin.
I did, and I'm glad. I hope you did as well. And I know this is Christmas for you. So coach gets fired every couple hours, and everybody thinks they've got the next best coach coming to their school who's going to bring some great playbook and change their fortunes. And then another school is sadly disappointed at the same time if their coach leaves, or as we saw yesterday, as the coach they want doesn't show up. So with that said, I want to talk about some games real quick. So the polls came out. Oklahoma, Ohio State, 5 and 6, to be number 4 if Georgia loses. Who should be number 4 if Georgia loses and they both win, and why?
Wow. I think you could actually make a case that Georgia should stay number 4. I don't think that's what's going to happen. But you look at Georgia's entire body of work, and they would have had some very impressive wins against teams that are currently in the top 25 of the selection committee's rankings. They would have had wins against Missouri, which creeped in the top 25 this week, wins against Florida, wins against Kentucky. Auburn is no longer ranked. And then if they lose a close one against Alabama, certainly I don't think they should be penalized for that. However, the committee has never selected a team with 2 losses, and I think the committee would have a hard time justifying the fact that they had a team that was ranked number 4, and even though they lost to the number 1 team in the country, that they keep them in their top 4. If we're going to agree that Georgia falls out, it's pretty simple. It's obviously Oklahoma and Ohio State. What benefits Oklahoma is the committee thinks highly enough of the Sooners to rank them above Ohio State right now. They play a higher-ranked team in the conference championship against Texas than Ohio State does in Northwestern. But keep in mind, there's 13 committee members. 3 committee members will be recused from voting on Oklahoma and Ohio State, and that's OU Athletic Director Joe Castiglione, Ohio State Athletic Director Gene Smith, and former Virginia Tech coach Frank Beamer, whose son is on Oklahoma's staff. So now you're down to 10 committee members. So what we don't know is how close was the voting between Oklahoma and Ohio State last week. I've gone through the mock selection committee twice now. So it could literally be a 1-point difference between those schools. So now if you only have one person change their mind and put Ohio State over Oklahoma, all of a sudden Ohio State would go in at number 4 and Oklahoma number 5. I think it's going to come down to Saturday's games. If Ohio State rolls Northwestern by 4 touchdowns and Oklahoma, gets in a back-and-forth tennis match with Texas and only wins by 3 points, I would not be surprised if Ohio State jumps the Sooners. However, if Oklahoma can win by 2 touchdowns, I think that will be impressive enough for the committee, showing that they avenged their only loss, which was 3 points. And even if Ohio State wins big, I don't think that'll be enough. I think ultimately, if that happens, what will have kept Ohio State out of the playoff was the big loss to Purdue, 49-20, a 4-touchdown loss to Purdue, which I remember you called earlier this year. I think that would keep Ohio State out. But the only certainty that we know right now is Notre Dame's in no matter what. And I really believe that even if Alabama loses, I think Alabama stays in the top 4 somewhere. So those things are set. Clemson has to win to stay in the playoff. If they lose, they're out. But, yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see what happens if Alabama wins and then see what happens between Oklahoma and Ohio State.
So it's margin of victory, and I guess that's a big thing I'll look at. I wonder this. Is we talk about, does Georgia lose close? Okay, well, if Georgia loses close, somebody chalks that up to a win because nobody has lost close to Alabama yet. So, okay, we'll keep Georgia in. Then you've got the discussion of, hey, wait a second, you've got 3 of the Power 5 are left out. And I also wonder about, do you see Ohio State saying, I always go back to do you remember the Titans when he says, leave no doubt, run it up?
Right.
Do you see Urban Meyer saying, "Hey, listen, we've got nothing to lose"? Because correct me if I'm wrong, it was 14 or 15. It was close, but they won 59-0 in the conference championship game, and that's what took them over the top. Do you see them just saying, "Hey, we're stepping on the gas. We're not trying to just win. We're trying to make a statement"?
Absolutely, and both Urban Meyer and Lincoln Riley had said they're not going to worry about style points, but I guarantee you they are going to worry about style points. And Urban Meyer will try to run it up if he can because he knows he needs a big victory to have a shot to get in. I think one big difference between 2014, Kevin, is back then Baylor and TCU, the Big 12 didn't have a championship game, so there was no conference champion. They were co-champs. So that I think that helped Ohio State jump those teams. But now there's a clear-cut conference champion. So if Oklahoma wins a game against Texas, then certainly they would be a conference champion like Ohio State would be a conference champion. And again, you look at the resumes. Penn State would have basically 3 quality wins: Penn State, Michigan State, and Michigan. Oklahoma would have wins against Texas, an Army team with 10 wins, but still is not ranked, so the committee probably is not looking at that. And then they've got wins against, West Virginia and Iowa State. So I think Ohio State has the best win head-to-head against Oklahoma, but Ohio State also has the worst loss. And I remember last year when Nick Saban went on SportsCenter and they were talking about Alabama being in the playoff, they didn't win the conference championship. He referenced Ohio State's loss to Iowa. And he told Scott Van Pelt, if we lost by 31 points on the road, we wouldn't be having that conversation. I think it's very similar this year for Buckeye fans because they have the 29-point loss to Purdue. And so how much is that going to penalize them? We're certainly going to find out. But I know a lot has been made about Oklahoma's defensive issues. But Rob Mullins, I think he gave a little insight on what the committee's thinking. He said, yeah, they've had some defensive issues, but they also have a historic offense. And I agree with him because as bad as Oklahoma's offense is, they're still outscoring teams. Oklahoma's not 7-5; they're 11-1.
Well, Brett, so let me ask you this, though.
Giving up a ton of points, they're also scoring a ton.
Well, what do you think about, and I go back to the defense because the next thing I want to do is just talk about defense. But I look at Oklahoma, and how many weeks ago was it that Ruffin McNeil became the D coordinator? And was it 3 or no more than 3? But I go back and I look at...
It was after the Texas loss.
Oh, so it was that... Okay, I didn't know it was that...
Yeah, so it's been 6 games. The points have not... I mean, right after they go at TCU, they lose 52-27, which, if you want to compare scores, Ohio State beat TCU 40-28, so they beat them by 12.
Yes.
Oklahoma won at TCU by 25. So
it's
again,
30,
I know
No,
it's 52-27.
Okay.
So it's you're comparing. It's the same opponent. They're playing at different times of the year, but they did have a common opponent. But yeah, since Ruffin McNeil took over, the first 2 weeks they gave up 27 against TCU, they give up 14 against Kansas State, but the last 4 weeks they give up 46, 47, 40, 56. I mean, that sounds like a 6th grader's bowling scores. Oklahoma became the first team ever to give up 40 points in 4 consecutive games and win all 4 games. So yeah, the defensive issues have not improved much. I think initially it was more the opponent. But again, they're just scoring people, outscoring people. They have the number 1 offense in the country. It's not a simple call right now. I would give Oklahoma the slight edge going into Saturday and see what happens.
I was looking at that in defenses because the one thing we talk about is, Dr. Lou Holtz said there's an epidemic in college football, and it's called bad defense. And I went back to a little research on that. And what's your thoughts? Is there bad defense this year, or has there been, or is there just a lot better offense?
Kevin, I think it's a combination of a lot of things. I mean, the offenses they're running so fast now. I mean, you've got to get quick. You got to get smaller, quicker guys to play defense. And also, I think, they've cut back on practicing. I don't think they probably practice tackling drills like they did, 10, 20 years ago. I think the athletes are much faster. The offenses are getting these players in space one-on-one. And so if you miss one tackle, you're gone, 60 yards. Where in the old days, they'd run it up the middle or whatever. One guy misses a tackle, or there's three more guys within 5 yards.
Well, you remember the line's job was to keep
and all that stuff.
If you remember, the lineman's job was to keep the offensive linemen off the linebackers. They say, okay, what'd you do? Well, I backed the line. I mean, you talk to the 60-year-old guy, he goes, well, I backed the line. Whereas now linebackers, hey, listen, you got to cover somebody. You have to. It's in D lineman, you need to put pressure up there. You need to get in the lanes. And I just go back to that because one of the things I picked out, Brett, was interesting, is that 20 of the top 25, there's only 20 teams in the top 25 that are in the top 50 scoring defense. And I think that's pretty good numbers. Obviously, defense, helps win. They say defense wins championships. But you go back to Oklahoma's number 100, Ohio State's number 57 in scoring defense, Texas is 52. And then, but if you look at the top, it's crazy. Mississippi State, obviously they don't have much offense anymore, but Alabama and Clemson are 3 and 4. And that's just, I'm wondering, is it, you ever think about, we talk about, the field stayed the same, it's the same size, but you've got linebackers now that are, 250 running a 4.4. You look at some of those guys down in Tuscaloosa, and is it going to throw more? Obviously, Big 12, the highest ranked Big 12 defense is Texas, and they're 52. I wonder if you find that interesting. And is that ever, things like that have anything to do when they start picking these playoff teams?
Well, not really. And the thing, as far as points allowed, I kind of take that with a grain of salt now, because the offense and so many points that the defenses are going to allow more points, because your offense scores so many points, the opposing team's going to get the ball more and have more opportunities to score. So the thing I like to look at is yards per play, because it doesn't matter if you run 50 plays or you run 100 plays. Yard per play is pretty basic. And I think, again, going back to the Oklahoma and Ohio State argument, that's why I give Oklahoma the edge. They've got a difference between their offense and defensive yards per play of about plus 2.5 yards per play on the positive, while Ohio State is only about plus 1 yard per play. And so I put more weight into yards per play than I do total points, because total points, if your offense is scoring a lot, then your defense is going to be on the field a lot more. And I think the perfect example is when Oregon first started, was one of the first teams to run the high-tempo offense, and their offense would put up a ton of points, and then their defense would give up a ton of points. And I remember talking to some of their defensive coaches, and they're like, look, we're doing a good job defensively, but when our defense is on the field for 80 plays, you got to put it in perspective. So I think the old thinking of they're giving up X number of points a game or X number of yards a game, I don't think that's a relevant way to compare these teams now, just because all these defenses are facing so many more plays. But I do think you asked about how does it impact the college football playoff selection committee. Well, you've got former coaches on that committee, so they're certainly, so they may put more emphasis on the defense, and that could come into play when they pick their Final Four teams for the playoff.
Because I think about last year, Oklahoma, Georgia, you had an SEC team, and obviously the Big 12 team. And was it 52-48 in overtime, something like that? It was amazing. It's going to be exciting. Well, I have another thing, because I know you're real excited this week because your phone's ringing off the hook. Somebody's already been fired since we've been talking. Talk about coaching Carousel. Colorado, Georgia Tech, Maryland, Louisville, now ECU. What do you see right there as kind of what's the best job, as in can win the soonest, and any ideas of who's going to go where?
Well, now that Jeff Brom's staying at Purdue, sources have told me that Scott Satterfield, the Appalachian State coach, is the number one target for Louisville. The Mountaineers play Louisiana on Saturday in a Sun Belt title game, so I don't think you'll see any movement between Louisville and Satterfield until at the bowl game. If wins that game, they would go to the New Orleans Bowl, but Satterfield has done a tremendous job at App State, and I really think I'd be shocked if he doesn't end up the next coach at Louisville. Obviously, Louisville had to make a run at Jeff Brom. He's a native of Louisville. He played at Louisville under Howard Schnellenberger. But ultimately, Brom said, the timing wasn't right. He wanted to remain at Purdue. So it's obviously a huge win for Purdue. Some of the other jobs, what I've been told is Matt Wells at Utah State. He looks to be the favorite at Texas Tech. Kirby Hocutt, Texas Tech's athletic director, also is considering Jim Leavitt, who he knows from their days back at Kansas State. Leavitt, the former Colorado defensive coordinator, is now defensive coordinator at Oregon, right, and the former head coach at South Florida. So Leavitt could be in play at Texas Tech. As far as Colorado, Leavitt's also, I think, a possibility out there because of his former ties to that school.
You heard
Dana Holgorsen could be a possibility, at Colorado. And now, if that ends up happening, it's kind of funny because Colorado is it is in the Pac-12, but it's kind of like an outlier. Everybody else is on the coast or paired up with another rival school nearby, Arizona State, Arizona, obviously Washington State, Oregon State, and the California schools. So Colorado's kind of out there on their own. Well, that's kind of how West Virginia is in the Big 12.
Yeah, it's like
they
one
really
mountain outpost to another.
Rivals. Exactly. So he's obviously been at West Virginia. He's had a lot of success. Some coaches think look, I've been at a place 5 or 6 years, and like it or not, some fan bases are like, they get tired of a coach and like, okay, we want to move on. And certainly the year West Virginia's had, nationally ranked, they threatened, they were in the talk for the college football playoff for a while. Ultimately, the loss to Oklahoma knocked them out of Big 12 title contention. And then also Will Grier, so obviously Dana's at his high point at West Virginia. And so do you want to try to move on before tougher times ensue? Well, we will have to find out what happens there.
And that's a mixed relationship there. I'm married into that family. Let me tell you, that's very mixed. Here's a question I have, because you've been around and you talk about Scott Satterfield, Appalachian State, maybe go to Louisville, obviously maybe go somewhere else. Well, Satterfield, as you know, 20 years as a coach in some capacity, but 17 of those are in Boone, North Carolina. And I'm trying to come up with examples of a successful coach at a Power 5 school that's got some resources, who is coming from with no experience, has never even been on the staff of another Power 5 school. Is that a secret to success, or is that just kind of, are you rolling the dice big time?
I think it's an individual preference. I mean, these athletic directors, they have to decide, how they want to proceed, because fair or not, if their coach is successful, they'll get credit, and if he's not successful, they're gonna get the blame. I think part of the reason is why some of the recent hires, Mac Brown at North Carolina, Les Miles at Kansas. You've got athletic directors in Bubba Cunningham and Jeff Long at North Carolina and Kansas, respectively, who basically, these guys are proven winners. They've won national championships. Where their program is right now, they want somebody to come in and stabilize the program. They're not looking necessarily for a quick fix, for a turnaround after one season. I think they realize that, look, it's going to take a number of years before we can compete for the conference title at these schools. And so it's more important to have somebody come in and right the ship, if you will, and get the program on solid foundation, and then you can hand it off then to whoever the upshot hot offensive coordinator or hot coaching younger candidate is at that point. But I guess they feel it's more secure, and they simply are more comfortable by putting it in the hands of a proven winner, because they know what it takes to get back to a winning program. And for both programs, specifically Kansas, at this point, you just want to get to a bowl game. I mean, they're not expecting Les Miles to compete for the Big 12 title.
No.
Make no mistake. But they are hoping, hey, we can turn this thing around and get to where we can get to a bowl game consistently, and that would be huge for the Jayhawks.
Well, and I think you say Mac Brown and Les Miles, and Arizona State is proving that model. Bring in the leader who is, not an offensive guy, not a defensive guy, but he's a football coach. And I'll be interested in how that goes. Georgia Tech, you and I talked about this a couple months ago. Georgia Tech and Maryland, I think somewhat sleeping giants. Georgia Tech, what do you think are they gonna try to get back to real big time Power 5 football, or are they gonna look for somebody that runs the option again?
Well, Ken Wisenhunt obviously has a history with athletic director Todd Stansberry, so he's been mentioned as possibly the favorite to replace Paul Johnson. A lot of coaches I talked to, this is a very attractive job. It's a Power 5 job. You're obviously in the ACC. You're in Atlanta. You're in the hotbed of one of the nation's top recruiting areas. So I don't think they're married to the option. In fact, I would be surprised if they stick with the option. But we'll have to see how this plays out, because being there in Georgia, you've got plenty of players within a couple-hour drive. You get down to Florida. That's the good news. The bad news is you're competing against the best of the best. So you got Georgia right there. You got Florida. Obviously, you got all the schools in the SEC. But I think Georgia Tech's going to be one of the more intriguing jobs as far as who ends up there, because I think a lot of people think, there's a lot of real opportunity there. And I do think they will get away from running the option attack and think more along the lines of, a run RPO type offense, fast-paced attack like pretty much everybody else is running in college football these days.
When they got the athletes, I looked at this, Brett, is that obviously how we talked about admission standards, and right now their average ACT is between 30 and 33. Notre Dame's 32 to 35, Stanford's 31 to 35. But then you go back to recruiting. Their last 4 classes in the ACC out of 12 teams are 8, 11, 9, and 10. And so obviously you're going after, hey, I'm going to get the Justin Thomas from Prattville, Alabama, 5'10" quarterback who's smart, and he can run the option. And hopefully they're going to get somebody that's going to take, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, you bring in somebody that runs the spread, that runs a pro style, that runs whatever, anything but the triple option. Can you think of a team in the last however many years that went from 10 years of a triple option to a spread offense and succeeded? And how long does that take? Is that a 3-year project?
Yeah, no, I really haven't. Obviously the option attacks you see mainly at the academies, Army, Navy, and Air Force. So yeah, it's very rare for a. I know Tulane's running some different things, and who else? I know there's some others out there. I'm blanking right now, but yeah, for the most part, I usually just see the academies with those option attacks.
Well, who you've got as we look at this? We talked about Maryland. What's Canada's status right now, and where are they going to go?
I really think that Mike Locksley will be the next coach at Maryland. Sources have told me he is the number 1 target. Obviously, they've got the college football playoff going on, and for Nick Saban, here's yet another assistant coach that he could lose either during or after the playoffs. You had Lane Kiffin, Jeremy Pruitt, or a couple of previous coaches. And, we'll have to see. I think Locksley will remain at Alabama until the playoffs are over. How soon he would be announced as Maryland's coach, we'll have to find out. I've heard that he will not interview with Maryland until after the SEC title game on Saturday. But we'll have to see how quickly, 1, that Maryland wants to move on this, and 2, how quickly Locksley wants to wants to move on it as well, because as we know, when Kiffin took over as coach at FAU, that he actually didn't coach in the final game because of the conflicts with Florida Atlantic, and Saban just didn't feel like it would work out. Well,
but Kirby Smart did coach in the national championship, though, right?
Right, the others did. Yes,
I think that was more of a maturity issue, and don't you think?
Well, I think that's a little bit of it. Yeah, they handled it better. Jeremy Pruitt also. So yeah, I mean, each person it's been different. I think Loxley would stay on there. It's obviously a boost for Maryland. It gets them a ton of publicity when your next coach is the offensive coordinator coaching for another national title. So I think Loxley's the guy at Maryland. Just when it happens, though, we'll have to wait and see.
Well, it's funny that you said Loxley, because I went through a list preparing to talk to you today. I said coaching carousel. Brent Venables, I've heard he's staying. He supposedly made a promise to his kid, who's a freshman, that he's going to stay at Clemson. But I don't know if Bill Snyder can change that decision. I don't know. But then I put Ryan, in no particular order, but I put Ryan Day, Luke Fickell, Dave Renata, Neil Brown, Bill Clark, UAB. I think he's on that guy's something else. But then the other one I had, Brett, was any Nick Saban assistant. So I think, what's it take? Probably a year and a half to get anointed down there, and then you're good to go. Because have you seen any of them that haven't had success, or at least moderate success, or showed potential?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. If you coach with Saban, you got a good shot. That's certainly works wonders. And is Mike Loxley going to be the next one to be the next head coach?
Well, I don't know. We're going to see that soon, and I'm pretty excited to check this out. But I appreciate it. I know this is actually your Christmas, your busiest time, because somebody going to get fired, somebody's going to get hired. If you hear anything, let us know, and I'll do the same. But I look forward to talking to you again, and thanks for having you on the Carousel College Football Show podcast. And Brett, I look forward to talking to you again.